Hello, everybody. Jan Rutherford here with Self-Reliant Leadership. Hey, thanks for joining this sixth webinar in a series that we do every quarter. And today I've got a really special presentation that's sort of a preview of what we'll be doing later this year. So what I'd like to do is share my screen with you as we get started. And here we go. So the presentation today is on why low tech, gritty, and green makes teams. So getting people into the wilderness and uncomfortable can forever change internal dialogue and reinforce the power of grit. The insights are sparked because people face a real test, what we call a crucible or a pressure test, in which people are shaped into something indomitable. In doing so, it changes their narrative and how they perceive their own story. Through behavioral analysis, we know that being a little cold, wet, tired, and hungry changes perspectives on resiliency. People start to see the world and their duty in it through a different lens. Their willingness to overcome obstacles as team member changes significantly and it persists. It helps people face their own hypocrisy and realize that leadership development is actually a team sport built on trust. So the recipe. A lot of people have said that have been on these crucible experiences out in the wilderness, how come we can't do this back at the office? Why is it so easy to take individuals that are strangers and put a great team together, yet it's so difficult? And so people have asked me, hey, what's the recipe? And I've said for a long time, I don't think there is a recipe. But given that we've been running these expeditions for about 6 years now, I think I've come up with what I think might be 4 ingredients, if you will. The first one is time. There is no substitute for spending time and building relationships. We actually called it down in Patagonia terminal velocity. Some people that are familiar with skydiving know that when you jump out of a plane, you'll hit 120 miles an hour and you will not further accelerate. You just can't go faster. People have said on the Crucible, there's no substitute for time. You can't speed it up in developing relationships. So that's the first thing, is to really set aside time. The second thing is, I mentioned in the title, this is about green. And I think there is something about getting outside, whether it's a walk around the building, but getting outside, getting in a place where there's something green, something, the wind in your hair, whatever it might be. But we all felt that that is a really significant ingredient, that you've got to step away from the normal surroundings that stifle creativity. The third recipe or ingredient to the recipe is to filter out all the noise. And we all know that this particular thing is a detractor and distractor. So when we get out there and there's no Wi-Fi, there's no cell signal, people have no other choice but to engage one another. And I think it also gives perspective. We're so busy and we're so tied up in what we're doing. If we don't figure out ways to filter out the noise, we're really hurting ourselves. And somebody said to me recently, busy is the new stupid, because we all know a common response when we ask people how they're doing is, oh, really busy. And we also know that most people spend all their time working on important, urgent things instead of things that are really important but will never be urgent. So that's the third ingredient. The fourth ingredient is a loose agenda. I think you need something of an agenda. Hey, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's the outcome. But if everything's so rigid, it doesn't allow for what you might call the rabbit holes. So I think it's important for the conversations to go where they might, and to allow people to have group time and one-on-one time and being in pairs. And from the work that Google did with Project Aristotle, we know that the teams that were very rigid, they might have been really efficient meetings, but it didn't do what it needed to do to form relationships and build trust. So, of course, when we do all these things at the end, the result and what we're hoping for, of course, is this whole thing called trust. And whether we're out on an expedition and somebody's belaying somebody that's climbing and they're trusting that person on the ground to keep them safe, what we really would like to know in our work is that the person to the side of you and back of you and in front of you literally has your back. It's someone that you can trust. They're working in your best interest. Now, in an organization, unlike when we go out on the expeditions, there's a lot of hierarchy. You've got people above you, you've got people to the side of you, you may have people that report to you. And all three of those cohorts are really important for your success. You can't just worry about your team. You can't just worry about your peers, and you can't just worry about your boss or the board or whomever that is. You really have to worry about all of those constituents, because all of those constituents can help you be successful, and those constituents can also cause your demise if you haven't taken care of them really well. So those are all the ingredients, and again, what we're after as leader, of course, is we build a team built on trust. And on a recent expedition that happened, one of the participants came back and wrote what you see up on the screen here. And she talked about being selected and recommended and accelerated for promotion and nominated and commendations and lauded and praised throughout her 9 years affiliated with the Coast Guard, 4 years at the Coast Guard Academy, and 5 years as a Coast Guard officer. And what she said after 4 days and 3 nights is none of that gave her the same sense of validation about her leadership that she got um, from the crucible. And it wasn't so much the crucible, it was really the environment we created and the people that we selected to put her around. And it was also the way that we framed expectations, that people were coming out there, had an aim to be as selfless as possible, we before me, that there is a certain amount of adventure, and by that I meant boldness, to think, to come out of the comfort zone. And lastly, aspirations beyond themselves, beyond power and money, some sort of aspiration to give back and to serve and to make the world a better place. So I think that was also a bit of an ingredient. So in the framework of all this, it really comes back to leading yourself, and that is, how do you do that? And well, you have to take ownership. You have to take personal responsibility for that. When it comes to leading others, we know we can't control them, but we can influence them. And that's the what. People don't want to know. They don't want to hear from you how to do things. They want to know, well, what needs to get accomplished. And then we have shared accountability. Hey, I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do, and I understand exactly what the expectation is. At the highest level, it really is about leading the organization. The why, and that's where the purpose comes in, and that's what creates alignment. What every CEO dreams of is there's no silos. All my teams are one team, and there's alignment and focus. So when it comes to ownership, it really is about cultivating grit. That's what we're really trying to do, and those are really character traits. And we see it out on the crucible. We see it in the business world. Most of the virtues have to be preceded by a certain degree of courage to step out of one's comfort zone. The accountability is really fostering a sense of duty to each other, that you really have each other's back and that people are taking care of each other. And as much as you might be cynical that this just doesn't happen, I see it every day with great, highly performing teams. It can happen. And part of the way that happens is at the organizational level. the great leaders really figure out what is the pace. What is the most important thing that we're going to do? And given my team and the environment, what's the pace? Is it always 60 miles an hour? Is it 90 miles an hour once in a while and then 30? Everybody wants, you know, the variations out of their cycles. They want everything just smooth. And that's just not reality. Out in the wilderness, we've got terrain that goes up and down. We've got weather that changes and wind, and we can't always go the same speed, and neither can a business. So again, to reiterate, leading self is really about character and self-awareness. And as Socrates said, know thyself. And it really is balancing this whole idea of courage and vigilance to be resourceful. We'll never have enough time, talent, or treasure. So we have to figure out, how do we do more with less? How do we take an inventory of what's available and say, okay, this is what we have. This is the problem set. How do we go about achieving this? And that's where working with others comes in, and this whole idea of coaching and building trust. And it's a little bit of, people are going to trust people that are confident, and at the same time, people that are humble. You want a certain amount of swagger, but you don't want somebody that's a narcissist. You want a certain degree of humility, but not somebody that has tons and tons of deference or self-blame, so that they're really about creating a collaborative team. And last, it really is about leading the organization. And this is about, and I use the word controls, and it doesn't mean command and controls, but it means putting bumpers or barriers or something in place to help with decision making. Who has the authority? What's the process? And what are the criteria? Oftentimes, nobody knows who has authority. So then we get in groups and no decisions are made. Oftentimes, we haven't said, hey, here's the process by which we're going to make the decision. It's going to be collaborative. It's going to be consensus. It's going to be directional. And we don't say, hey, here's all the factors that we've taken into consideration, the criteria by which we will make the decision. Out in the wilderness, one of the main things that's taken into consideration is always safety. In an organization, it might be, hey, at the end of the day, we've got to do things that produce a positive ROI. But we have to be clear either way. And so that's really about combining discipline to make sure that you stay on track and stay focused, at the same time allowing for a certain amount of creativity and innovation and adaptability given the circumstances. And to me, as a former CEO, this was the hardest job ever, because the job is about balancing the long-term investment with the short-term yield. It's what most organizations face all the time, and that is, I've got to hit my numbers in the quarter. At the same time, I've got to invest in the future. So I'll pause right there and see if anybody has any questions. If you could just submit them through the chat, that would be great. And as you're doing that, I'll move on to just sort of wrap up. And that is, when you look at creating a high performing team, it really has to be something that's intentional. In your mind's eye, what does that look like? Of all the teams you've ever been on, whether they're sports teams or community or church or business or whatever, what did they have in common? How were those bonds created where you knew that this was one of the best teams you've ever been on? And what can you do to create that? Now, every organization's strategy is really going to determine the culture, but the leader, wherever you're at in the hierarchy of the organization, has a lot of say-so in what that looks like. And if we're not intentional, that team is going to be by default rather than by design. So with that, I'm on my last slide, and I'll just mention that the fourth bullet there you'll see is cultivating grit, coming in December. And what we're hoping, not hoping, what will happen is, through LinkedIn Learning, we'll be launching a series of about 6 different courses. It'll be 5 minutes long, and it will really outline a lot of these things in a lot more detail. So let me see if there's any questions. And I've got one that came in, and it was asking about what is LinkedIn Learning. Um, Great question. LinkedIn Learning is a part of LinkedIn. And of course, LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. But LinkedIn Learning used to be called lynda.com. And it's a whole series of courses and ways that you can learn, from how to use Excel to how to coach, how to negotiate. There are, I think, something about 3,000 courses that are produced each and every year. And the authors that are selected to create these courses are some of the folks that are writing the best-selling books and real thought leaders out there. So it's a tremendous resource, and you can access it individually, and a lot of your companies and organizations probably have an enterprise license to be able to access those videos. I put out about a video about every week from that, and I make it free. So there's ways to get in there and sample it and see if it's of value based on what you're working. So with that, I don't see that there's any other questions. Um, if there's anything that I can help with in the future, feel free to reach out to me. And if I'm not the person that can help you, I'll be glad to make that connection. And again, remember, what makes great teams: a little bit of gritty, a little bit of green, and a little bit of low tech. All right. Have a great day out there.